Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dana White. Welcome to another Myth Salon. Today, we are especially pleased to have Dr. Ashok Bedi, and we're going to be talking about Patanjali Yoga and Jung, among other things. But before we begin, I would really like to open it up with a moment of silence for the 200,000 people who have died as a result of the coronavirus. We're well over 6 million cases in the United States, and the forecasts for getting out of this are not good. So, and on top of that, we have hurricanes in the south, we have wildfires in the west. As my sister-in-law is fond of telling me, all we need now are frogs. So, all right, I would like to open it up. Let's have a little moment of silence, please. Thank you. For all of the people we can think about who can benefit from what we're doing. And I would like to bring in and start today with a poem by Mary Oliver, whose birthday would have been last week on this Thursday. She died January 17th last year. The world is filled with loss. We all have to go. It's just the nature of it. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this: the fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. So with that, I would like to once again turn it over to my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Will Linn, who will introduce the panel and launch us into our day. Welcome, Will. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Dana. Welcome, everybody. And yeah, I was in Northern California seeing some of these fires. Yeah, it's quite a sun. Before we get started tonight, we shared in the newsletter that there would be a special announcement at the top of tonight's event. So I'm very excited to share this special announcement about the October 22nd celebration of the Writer's Journey with Chris Vogler. So Darren Aronofsky, the director of major mythic films like Pi, Black Swan, The Fountain, Noah, and Mother, has agreed to join us, as has Jeff Kripal, who's the chair of Esalen and founder of the Gnosticism, Esotericism, and Mysticism program at Rice University. So this will not be recorded. So I hope you won't miss it. I hope that you'll be there. Darren it will not be recorded. So we're really glad that we'll have Darren and Jeff there for this evening with Chris. They'll join Corinne and I as we engage the 25-year history of the writer's journey, from its significance to mythologists and filmmakers like Darren, to the origins, implications, and impacts of his work. Our MC, Corinne Bordeaux, is the director of Esalen's Film Festival, a graduate of Pacifica, and a dear friend of the Myth Salon. You know, my background is teaching myth and film at a performing arts college while working for the Joseph Campbell Foundation. Corinne and I, and Jeff and Chris, share a common interest And that interest is in the ever-growing dialogue between students of myth and makers of stories. So more crossover, more dialogue, more connection. That's what this evening is all about. The Myth Salon and Michael Weesey Productions are collaborating to invite mythologists and filmmakers to share in an evening with leading mythologists and mythological storytellers as we celebrate the writer's journey, a real bridge between our worlds of myth and storytelling. And following the same emphasis on myth and film, Corinne Bordeaux has agreed to host a screening event every season for our community, which is to say 4 per year. And so this is to remind you of an event we have next week. Corinne promoted Free Solo last year, has promoted Academy Award winning films every year, or nominated films every year for the last 15. We're incredibly grateful that she's going to start setting up this screening series for us. If you'd like to join, next week will be an event with a screening on Infinite Potential, all about Krishnamurti. More information on that will come out in the newsletters, and there will be a private link so that you can watch that on your own this weekend and then join us for the panel next week. Okay, that's a lot of announcement, but I have been very excited to share both of those with you, both moving in this direction of deepening the engagement between myth and film for this community. And this event on October 22nd is really going to be something special, and I hope that you won't miss it. And I wanted to make sure that those who came were the first to hear about it. So that's a lot of announcement. Turning to tonight we're joined by Ashok Bedi, who will introduce us to the 196 prescriptions of Patanjali and what this Hindu text has to teach us about transcendence, Brahman awareness, moksha, and even individuation. Dr. Bedi is a Jungian therapist and a liaison for the International Association for Analytical Psychology in India. We're incredibly fortunate for his guidance on the synergy between Tantrism and Jungian psychology. And I'm really excited, to get deeper into this. And this is a special night. It continues in some ways one of the themes we set up with a special panelist we have tonight, Dr. Patrick Mahaffey, who I'll introduce in just a moment. So to introduce the other panelists before we get started, the panelists you know very well by now. Dr. Dana White is a scholar, author, host of this Myth Salon, and adjunct faculty member at Pacifica Graduate Institute. I've introduced myself already. We're joined by Selina Matthews, who's a clinical psychologist, an author, keynote speaker, and a graduate of Pacifica who's been an ever-present participant and a supporter of this Myth Salon. Zaman Stanizai is a professor of mythology and political science at Pacifica and Cal State, a poet, a linguist, a mystic, and a Fulbright scholar. Vorris Nunley is a professor of rhetoric and philosophy at UC Riverside and author of Keeping It Hushed, the Barbershop and African-American Hush Harbor Rhetoric. I'd also like to thank Connie Zweig, who has introduced us to Ashok. Thank you. Connie is an internationally renowned psychologist for her work on shadow, whose books include Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow. Dennis, what a full panel tonight, a mythology scholar, a poet, longtime professor in Pacifica's Myth program, and author of An Obscure Order, Reflections on Cultural Mythologies. And our special panelist tonight, Dr. Patrick Mahaffey, founding chair of the Master's and PhD program in Mythology and Deaf Psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute, author of Integrative Spirituality, which is what he joined us to discuss last time he was here. So hopefully he can give us some extra guidance tonight with Ashok. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Ashok. Thank you for the patience. I apologize for the long introduction. I'm very much looking forward to this evening with you.
Thank you all. I'm honored to be with my peers in California and across the world for an opportunity to share and dialogue about the wisdom of the East. Presently, we are caught in the turbulence, in the what Jung would call the spirit of the times, the turbulent, dark, Wotan-like spirit, the dance of Shiva, the destructive dance of Shiva. And when we are so lost in the turbulence on the surface, the place for us to get centered is to return to the wisdom of the depth. And the wisdom that Indians, Easterners often go to is the timeless wisdom of Patanjali's yoga and the 196 timeless ancient prescriptions which still guide over 1 billion Indians in their quest for individuation and transcendence and have inspired the rest of the world for centuries. But before I start with a deep dive, or at least a bit of a dive, because it would take several thousand years to unpack all of that wisdom, because it has taken thousands of years to accumulate it, and many, many great souls have made a contribution to it. So with humility, I would say deep dive is not the right word, but a sort of a skating on the surface of Patanjali's timeless Yoga Sutra. Let me introduce you to a few terms which may be helpful so that you are aware of what I'm trying to. The word tantra is often used in the West in sort of a esoteric manner, but let me explain what Hindus mean by a tantra. A tantra is basically a weave, a magic carpet, an instrument, a talisman that you create for your own individuation and transcendence. So it is not a specific path, but each one of us can create our own tantra, our own paradigm, our own psychic instrumentation, if it's using more Western terms, to access the timeless wisdom of the depth. So it could be any esoteric tradition, provided it is coherent and relevant to your own framework, own frame of reference. Then, of course, it becomes a tantra. And of course, later on, Sir John Woodruff and others, they use that term in a more specific manner. But if you go to the core, the word tantra in India is used as a specific paradigm that each one of us creates for our own individuation process. So in that context, the whole Jungian analytical psychology would be sort of a prima materia for some of us to create a tantra. We will take a little bit of a journey into the overview of Hindu tradition so that we can put Patanjali in its proper topological context where it fits in the bigger picture. But that I wanted to clarify that is what Tantra would be in East, at least. That's what we'll consider to be a Tantra. So let me eyeball one little term which may be of use. If you go to my grandmother and ask her what is Hinduism, she will use two terms. One is, she would say, Tat Swam Asi, from the Upanishads. That means that art thou. You are part of the divine Brahman consciousness. You and I are part of the collective. Tat Swam Asi. Of course, that one word is enough to keep a Jungian scholar busy for a lifetime, but I will take a minute to amplify it. It means that each one of us, I will keep connecting the Patanjali with the Jungian dots because that is a specific interest of this particular group. So each one of us has a terrestrial self, a human self, and each one of us has a celestial self, a spiritual self. What is the central essence of Bhagavad Gita? That timeless Krishna consciousness or Christ consciousness or the soul self-consciousness, awareness of the self, awareness of the inner Antaryamin, the divine within. Antaryamin meaning the God within each one of us. So Tat Swam Asi is a conscious connection with that energy. All of us are connected to it. The only difference between someone who is connected to it unconsciously and someone who's connected to it consciously, that very little difference is what individuation is all about. So when we are not conscious of it, it carries us. When we are conscious of it, we can partner with it. But in either case, the partnership is more profound if we are consciously connected to Tat Swam Asi, the divine within, the Brahman awareness in the universe. And the other principle that an average Hindu will use in constructing this Tantra from this timeless, infinite source of wisdom in its ancient scriptures is the term Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, meaning as self, so the universe, which was a central guiding principle for all the great ones of the East. Mahatma Gandhi used that as his guiding principle, meaning as self, so the universe, be the change. So if you want to change the world, we're not going to change it by changing our leaders only. We're not going to change it by changing the way we build roads or buildings. We're not going to change it by the way we build our curriculum. All of that is important. But at the end, we will only change the world around us if we first change in the image of the change we hope for the others. So to begin with self, and Jung would of course agree with that. He presumed, he postulated that when each one of us does the work of our individuation, we don't just individuate personally, we become part of the building block of the individuation of the collective. So that is the old grandma wisdom in an average Indian family. these are the two principles that are sort of brought home to a growing child, always reminding us that Tatsvamasi, you are part of the collective. And Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, as self for the others. So always focusing on the self. So when Hindus talk about self, sometimes it seems self-serving, it seems narcissistic, it seems like self-absorption. But they're talking about working on the self, transforming self, aligning self with the transcendent. That is the goal of an average Hindu's individuation process, which is done more organically and not formally. Of course, the gurus and others are the great guide to Indians in that process, but essentially that is their goal, is to find that connection. Now, before we put the Patanjali system in its proper frame, let me just give you a 2-minute overview of Hindu tradition and where this fits. So if you go and study Hinduism in any detail, you will learn that there is a 4 or 5 layer pyramid that you must construct in your mind so that you can locate this whole system in its proper relationship to the other underlying systems. So the first one is, of course, the Indus Valley civilization, which predated Vedas and Hinduism by several thousand years. So some people say 5,000, 3 to 5,000 BC is where there was Indus Valley civilization. We know this because of the recent archaeological finds where we find this ancient civilization. I visited some of these sites during my visits to India. One is in Pakistan, which is called Mohenjo-daro. Of course, in my home, near my hometown in Ahmedabad, where Gandhiji did all his life's work, there is Lodi. There are places there are 5 cities which were connected along the Indus Sindhu River, or Indus Valley, what the Greeks called it Indus, because they couldn't say Sindhas. So Sindhu became Hindu later on in this terminology. So in this Indus Valley civilization archives, Lothal is one of the places where you could easily access, even now if you go to India, very easy access from Ahmedabad and Delhi. They found one very interesting image. Now remember, this was few thousand years before the so-called Aryan immigration to India. And in this archives, they found a stone's image of a figure which reminds one of a Shiva in meditative posture, doing yogasana. In other words, the Shiva tradition, the meditative tradition of India predated Vedas by at least 2 to 5,000 years. So, and that became reincorporated in Hinduism, in Vedanta literature as the Upanishads, the contemplative tradition of India. But anyways, just staying with that. So after the Indus Valley civilization, it was destroyed for some reason, came the Vedic Age after the Aryan immigration to India. They went to 2 places from Central Europe. One part went to Iran and became the Zoroastrian tradition, which Jung was so fond of. Of course, that was the inspiration for Nietzsche in his imaginal dialogue with Thus Spoke Zarathustra, who is a prophet of the Zoroastrian tradition, the fire worshippers. And the other tributary came through Afghanistan into India, and they became the Hindus. And these 2 traditions are very parallel. Today is not the day to discuss the comparative religion in terms of these 2 traditions. The interesting both of them are fire worshippers. The Hindus have all their sacred rituals to do with yagna and the fire, and the Zoroastrians, of course, are called the fire keepers of the fire, the holy flame, and so forth. Of course, that tradition was destroyed in Persia because of the spread of Islam. However, the people who were original Zoroastrians, they migrated to India, and they became Parsis, the Parsi immigrants, which are in the same state as Mahatma Gandhi's hometown. So it's interesting, Ouroboros, that these 2 clans met up, and the 2 great traditions, Zoroastrian and Hindu, reconnected on the axis in India in a small, peaceful community in India called the Parsis. Some of the greatest industrialists and politicians, scientists, Tata, all of them are all Parsis. It's a very fascinating long story, but again, I must refrain from those stories. Then came, of course, the Epic Age. Epic Age is, of course, the story of the great epics of India, the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And Mahabharata, of course, was a later one. The central protagonist of Ramayana was the warrior Hindu god Rama, the virtuous one. Not my favorite because he's very warlike, but that's my personal bias. And then, of course, in Mahabharata came Lord Krishna, my favorite, the divine trickster, who managed a whole world war without ever touching a weapon. He managed to manipulate and do whatever he needed to do behind the scenes. But the whole thing is always, if you read any of these epics, I know Dana has done some very fascinating work. So in that, there's always archetypal themes. The mythic archetypal themes resonate in every line of Mahabharata and Ramayana. I'll read out just one small paragraph or two from Bhagavad Gita, just to illustrate how the archetypal themes resonate in these timeless epics. So this is when Arjuna is a doubter. He does not want to go to war. He tells Krishna, this is not my gig. I'm a peace lover. I'd rather be, join Mahatma Gandhi's camp than go and fight and kill. So he's trying to be, Krishna is trying to persuade him that this is not your work. You're doing my work. You are just an instrument of my work. So at the end, Arjuna is still doubting this. He said, no, this sounds very good, but I'm not convinced. He was a doubter. So then, of course, if you read Bhagavad Gita in chapter 10, Krishna reveals his divine form, his Brahman form, his ultimate awareness that I am this archetypal energy and you are just playing out a small part of my program. So here is a description of Krishna. Listen, Arjuna, he says, I recount for you in essence the divine powers of myself, endless in the extent. I am the self-abiding in the heart of all creatures. I am the beginning, the middle, and their end. I am Vishnu, striding among sun gods, the radiant sun among lights. I am lightning among wind gods, the moon among stars. I am the song like Om in the sacred lore. I'm Indra, the king of gods. I'm the mind of senses, the consciousness of creatures. I'm the gracious Shiva among howling storm gods, the lord of wealth among demigods and demons, the fire blazing among bright gods. I'm the golden Meru towering over the mountains. He recites the whole archetypal energy. So whenever we see our life in action, Bhagavad Gita and these epics give us an archetypal context to our limited existence. So a temporal effort on part of each one of us becomes part of unfolding of the timeless archetypal drama in the collective. So when we get connected with that part, then we get connected with our celestial self. Then our number one personality in Jungian framework connects to the number two personality. So that whole drama of trying to connect with the core in Hindu meta psychology, time and again, the ordinary, the mundane is connected to the profound and the divine. And that dance, constant dance, is a central theme of these epics. The next, of course, is after that, in early Christ century, 200-300 years AD, and then for 1,000 years after that, all this Vedic literature and wisdom was systematized in a way that sort of news that you can use. So the news you can use are the 6 sutras, traditions of India. I'll outline them in a minute. And then, of course, you have the modern India with its interface with the West and new ideas. And of course, the most central tradition in contemporary India is the Vedanta tradition, which is the essence, the quintessence of all this material that I've talked about. So that gives you a bit of a map. Let me now sort of give you a sense of the Vedas themselves. There are 4 Vedas, of course. I'm not going to discuss all of them today. The Rig Veda are the sacrificial, there are hymns and the rituals of Vedas are about the creation cosmology and smaller gods and how the gods of nature, wind, Usha, the dawn, Sandhya, the sunset, and Nisha, the night, and so forth. All of these gods are honored. I think that comes from the sort of more pagan roots of the Aryans who came from Central Europe and so forth. So that became the Rig Veda. Then Yajur Veda is the second one. It gives you the sacrificial rituals that we must carry out to support these ideas of the Rig Veda, the creation mythology. Then, of course, the third is the Samaveda, which is lesser known. However, for scholars, that's very fascinating because that's the root of the music and the melodies of India. Now, of course, in modern neuroscience, there is a huge resurgence of the music and the mind. Every day, there is an article in neuroscience journals, medical journals, psychiatric journals on music and the mind. But this was outlined in Samaveda. So many scholars serious scholars of music go back to this foundation of Samaveda as a music and the mind, and the whole raga system and the sort of the classical Indian music is based on this foundation of Samaveda. Fascinating subject, but for some other day. And then, of course, the last one is the Atharva Veda, which is the magical systems that basically they are the precursors of modern Indian medicine in terms of Ayurveda, because Ayurveda is the Upaveda of Atharva Veda. So these are basically precursors of modern Ayurvedic traditions of India, where we talk about these balancing of doshas and so forth. All of that comes from that particular tradition. I again will probably just, and then of course there are heterodox traditions of India, Charvaka, which is they don't believe in God, they believe in here and now, enjoy life. So it's very popular in parts of India. It is about materialism, that the materialism is the gift of the universe. Let's celebrate it. Let's forget about God. So it's quite appealing to some people. The other is Buddhism. And of course, the parallel tradition to Buddhism is Jainism. Each of them very fascinating. Jainism, of course, was the favorite of Mahatma Gandhi. All his principles that he used in his fight against the colonial oppression of India come from the great tradition of Jainism. So those are some of the other traditions that you may find useful in your. Now, remember, when we're talking about these 5 layers of Indian meta-psychological evolution, the pre-Vedic India, the Indus Valley civilization, the Vedic tradition, the Sutra tradition, the epics, and the modern India, there was a parallel tradition to all this. This was all done in ashrams. This was all done in higher centers of learning, of Rishi tradition, the anchorite tradition of India. But all of this was also made available to a common person on the street through what we call the Puranas. Puranas was the lay person's Hinduism, and it is thousands of years old. It's very rich. It's a very rich literature. So what you and I may learn about Hinduism if you go to India is not the other stuff that I'm talking about. That is for scholars and Brahmins and academicians and gurus and rishis. But an average person will be using Puranas. So Purana is a popular sort of a little bit Hinduism for dummies, but it's very, very fascinating. And it is made, it's very useful because made the great tenets of this great tradition accessible to the common person in the street. So Puranas are where the rubber hits the road kind of thing for it. So the reason I'm giving you this topography is when you are studying a particular piece of Hindu literature, Hindu meta-psychology, you must locate it as to what is the source, what part of it you're talking about. Otherwise, you'll be totally confused. If you wanted to do an overview of Hinduism, I did a calculation. I'm not going to tell you how I did it. It will take you about 20,000 years to just get a broad overview of each of these. So be very humble. And I'm sure that's true of every tradition. I'm not as familiar with other traditions, other than, of course, a little bit about Christianity, because I was raised, inspired of being a Hindu in the Jesuit tradition all the way from kindergarten to pre-medical. So I had these 2 schizophrenic parallel tracks, which became the strength of my integrative approach later on. But it was quite useful and synchronistic. So that's the tradition. Now, if you, now of course the sutras that we talk about, the sutras are these, as you remember, the subsection, they come after the Vedas are the sutras. So there are 6 sutras now. Sutras meaning string, a collection, a garland of ideas put together. So there are 6 sutras in India. The first sutra is Nyaya Sutra, which is basically a cognitive system that cognitive behavior therapists would love it. If they can just study that, it can totally enhance the cognitive behavioral approach. So the Nyaya means doing justice to your thinking process. Nyaya is a cognitive system of discernment. It's very, very fascinating, very mathematical, very precise. The next one is Vishishka. Vishishka means Vishesh in Sanskrit means unique, is to discern what is unique about each situation, each object, each individual, each circumstance, each paradigm. So it's a very fascinating system. And it basically is a basis of perhaps this binary thinking. It is A or B. Is it black or white? It is what is unique about this. So you kind of go down to the very quintessence of something. So the Vishesha, for example, of each individual is their individuation that is unique about that individual. So Visheshika is a system of discerning, getting to the root, the essence of what is unique about each one of us or each situation. Then is the Samkhya Sutra, which is the creation cosmology of India. Very fascinating again. It talks about a very simple system of Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is consciousness, Prakriti is nature. They both are twins, never shall meet. They are parallel lines, and parallel lines, of course, never meet. So the whole mystery in the Samkhya Sutra is how do these parallel lines meet? I've been researching this with the help of a physicist, my brother, who's a physicist, and we have been kind of working on that, very fascinating. And if you, well, let me not get caught in that, but that would be the subject of, when Purusha, consciousness, enters nature, it can enter through one of the 23 portals of consciousness. So they are like senses, they are your attributes. It's a very, very precise and mathematical system, but the central mystery is why do these parallel lines meet? What creates a spark of new creation? Why do they come together? Now, of course, parallel lines do meet at infinity. So, but they can meet under special circumstances, and those circumstances become the central basis of the creation mythology of the East. And then, of course, based on those 3 systems, Nyaya, Visheshka, and Samkhya is the tradition of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So they are based on that foundational, solid foundational base. Of course, with the background of the pre-Indus Valley civilization, the background of Vedas, the background of the epics, the background of the sutras then, and then, of course, all of this integrated in modern Vedanta approach to spirituality. And then, of course, the next one after Patanjali Yoga is what we call the Mimamsa Sutra. Mimamsa Sutra is about spiritual rules of engagement in the first half of life. How do we engage life in a dharmic manner so that we don't create negative karma and yet build up a storehouse of positive karma, which leads to moksha, dharma, and then freedom from these tangles of life and death. So that would be the Purva Mimamsa or just Mimamsa. And at the very top of all of this comes together in the Vedanta. Vedanta means the end of, Anta means end. Vedanta means the end, the culmination, the peak, the climax of the old Vedic school of thought. So those are some very simple principles. For example, give you one example of a Vedanta psychology is each one of us can have several levels of existence. We could be like stone. We could be a little more evolved like minerals. We could be still more evolved like plants, or we may be slightly more evolved as animals. Then we will be evolved as demigods, which is archetypes, and then we become human. So the human is the top of that heap. And of course, so it's interesting that if you clinically, I always look at that, but I'm with a patient, I always feel, always intuitively try to feel them in my bones, in my system through this resonance. Where are they at? Are they like stone? There's no energy, no, like antisocial individual, psychopaths, like pure stone. There's no no heart, no soul in that person? Or are they like minerals? There is soul, but it's very lopsided. They are either gold, all gold, like Midas touch, or all lead, all dark, nothing. We know some people who are lead people out there right now, so without getting into it. So all that. And then, of course, we have animalistic people. They're like animals. They are reptilian, go dog eat dog environment. And then, of course, we have, so Vedanta gives you sort of a very fascinating, interesting approach to understanding the psychodynamic of the other. Where in your system, through what we call the pranic tuning, pranic healing, where do you feel that person in your body? Where, what image comes up to them? That will be a fascinating subject I'm presenting somewhere on imagination in a couple of months. So where does your imagination take you when you're talking, taking that, feeling that person in your system? And of course, the research on that done is right there in your neighborhood by Dr. Dan Siegel at UCLA through what we call the resonance circuits. You feel the person in your system. But the Vedanta literature talks about pranic tuning in. We feel our breath. I can regulate my breath when I'm with a very disturbed patient, and sometimes it has a calming effect, or you might feel. So anyway, that subject is again a whole new topic, but I'm just giving you a sort of sampling, since this is a sampling of this, that you can start using this material. All of this is news you can use in some ways, and that has been the focus of my sort of work with people, students and patients and so forth. So that gives you a sort of context of where this whole thing fits. Now let's go to our main topic, which I have not even started, which is the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra proper. So Patanjali, of course, was established by the author of Patanjali was not Patanjali. He was merely the editor of the Patanjali text. So when we are talking about Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, it just means that the Patanjali literature was edited by him, summarized by him. It was a sort of a status report on the Yoga Sutras up to that point in time, pulling it in from the Vedas, pulling it in from the epics. There are several references to what is in Patanjali's 196 prescriptions in Bhagavad Gita. Time and again, there are numerous references to what is later on in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra in Bhagavad Gita and in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So it is very clear that Patanjali was maybe a group of scholars of Patanjali ashram, Patanjali order, who put all this together. Now the second thing is, if you read Patanjali, original in Sanskrit is basically only a 3 or 4 page book or pamphlet. Basically, it's not even a book. Just 196 prescriptions, actually 195, because the number 1 is welcome to yoga. Let us, now yoga begins. So essentially it's an invitation. It's not even a prescription, but it is an invitation. So it is a prescription, because unless you join in the flow of the collective, unless you join in the call of the spirit of the depth, no magic is going to happen. So it indeed is a important part of the invocation of the alchemy of the yoga transformation of the self, from number 1 to number 2 personality, from human to our celestial origins, from the human being to our spiritual consciousness, all that, from ahamkar, ego, to our what we call the Atman consciousness, and from Atman, of course, to Paramatman and Ishvara and Purusha and Brahman. So all those layers of transcendence are of course not necessary for us to discuss today, but I'm just giving you a sense of this whole invitation, parichay, getting to know that there is something below the surface of our consciousness. And so the first invitation, the number 1 sutra of Patanjali is, let yoga begin. Let the process of alchemy begin. Let the process of individuation begin. Let the process of transcendence begin. That whole invitation is a big one, is a gift. It's a divine calling. It's a call of the soul. What we'll call in India, the voice of your soul, Atma Niyavaj, the voice of your deeper part of you. So that's number one. So all of these 196 prescriptions are a summation. But yeah, I was saying why the only 4 pages. So the whole yoga tradition was passed on from one generation to the next of scholars by oral tradition. There were no books. They were written on some papyrus or something very, very fragile. So the best way they've passed it on is by oral tradition. So the easiest way to do is to just make it as easy to memorize as possible. So there's not even grammar. If you read the Sanskrit versions of Patanjali, there's no grammar in it. It's totally mind-boggling. So you need some scholars to decipher where the grammar is. And some of the disputes in different commentaries or bhyashas are because they connect the grammar differently. That changes the whole context. So that's all kind of, fodder for the academicians and scholars and spiritual wrestlers. But for us regular people, it's all not too relevant. Simple is the best. So those are the 106 prescriptions, which are basically very dense, very condensed. And we would actually not have understood any of that without the grammar and without unpacking. But fortunately for us, there was a tradition of rishis or scholars that continued to dialogue it and amplify it and so forth, till there was a possibility of printing it or writing it down. And those are called bhyasas or commentaries, amplifications, as if it were. And those amplifications are our Rosetta Stone, our kind of framework to decode the timeless wisdom of all these 6 sutras of Hindu tradition. So that leads to, now there are 2 paths to individuation, of course. We have the Samkhya path, which is the logical path. This is for the thinking function types. Or there is the yoga path, which is path of contemplation and devotion. So contemplation is the path of yoga. The 2, of course, are merged. They mix and match. How do they dance together? Of course, we will, it's for some other day. So let me then give you the layout of the Patanjali system. It is divided into 4 sections or 4 books. The first book is, of course, called the Samadhi Pada. Pada means pillar. So Samadhi Pada is sort of a basic, broad introduction to the art of yoga. Now, by the way, in the West, we confused yoga with all those asanas and so forth. That is only 1 line in whole of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So the naive ones, well, I'm doing yoga, which is nothing close to it. It is a whole, I think that's why Jung cautioned us that if we're going to apply this in the West, you can certainly apply in your own neighborhood. Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, who brought yoga to the West, particularly to California, he talks about that Jung was very fond of yoga. Of course, he used yoga approaches in his work, particularly in his active imagination. I have a little piece somewhere where I'm amplifying the use of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra in Jung's Red Book. But for today, I can only say that the yoga, as we understand in the West, is just one of 196 prescriptions, and a minor one for that in the on the Patanjali's yoga system. So the first one is the Samadhi Pada, the whole idea of stillness and contemplation, just a broad overview. And it has 51 lines in it. So 51 prescriptions, including the invitation. So 50 are in the Samadhi Pada. I will just take one small sliver of Samadhi Pada as an amplification so that you get a little sampling, a little on the buffet of this timeless wisdom of the depth. And that is the prescription number 2 of the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. It says the following: Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Just 4 words. There's not even grammar in it. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Here is what it means, according to scholars. Yoga, yoking with the divine, yoking with the transcendent, yoking with that Brahman ultimate awareness. To achieve that, the chitta, the consciousness, and that's amplified in many different ways in subsequent sort of prescriptions. The consciousness, ego consciousness, outer consciousness, menses, the mentalis, the senses, all of them, chitta, are forbidden. Nirodha meaning forbidden, advised not to, cautioned against. Vritti. Vritti means turbulence, movement. So to reach the yogic state of union, communion with the Brahman consciousness, with the divine, with the collective, with the unus mundus in our language, the consciousness must be stilled. The vritti, the turbulence, the monkey mind is forbidden. If you can just do that, that is adequate to do a complete yogic practice. So you don't have to do all those wonderful calisthenics or all the wonderful pranayama moves. If you can just sit still and just breathe quietly. Now that's easier said than done, of course, because we breathe at a normally at a rate of 18 breaths per minute when we are calm, and our lifespan is 70 years, about 75 now. A monkey, on an average, baseline breath is 30 breaths per minute, much faster than us, and the lifespan of a monkey is 15 to 20 years. An elephant breathes at about 10 breaths per minute, and its lifespan is 70 years because the elephant does not get ruffled like we do all the time. We think like elephants, calm for a while, but then we get back to the turbulence, the vritti. Tortoise takes 4 breaths per minute, and its lifespan is 300 years. So just stilling your breath increases, longevity. We don't need to do anything fancy-dancy. And just imagine if you still your breath, if you still your thoughts, if you still your emotions, just imagine the level of transcendence that can be achieved just by sitting still. Did you know that when you are sitting still, you are not getting in the way of the vibrations of the universe around you? Because at that time, when you sit still, you can feel the rotational energy of the earth, Mother Earth, at 1,000 miles an hour around its own axis. If you still manage to sit still through that, because that catches a lot of people, then we feel the rotational energy of the earth around the sun, which is, I think, 67,000 miles an hour. If you sit still, even then, if you sit still a little bit longer, then you, at the same time, the third energy vibration is the whole solar system, our solar system, the Milky Way, rotating around the central star Vega at the speed of 176,000 miles an hour. And there are many, many such layers. I just had a dialogue with someone about this. And at the end, if you sit still, you feel the energy of the CBR, the cosmic background radiation, which is the velocity of the universe, the speed of the universe expanding at its core. We can't really measure it in spite of our best instrumentation and supercomputers, but we can measure the hum, almost like Om, and that is called CBR, cosmic background radiation. So when we sit still, we become beneficiary of that wonderful, beautiful energy vibrations of the universe. We start vibrating at the same wavelength as all the cosmos, the stars, the planets, the galaxies, till the edge of the universe being created. All of that becomes part of our cosmic reboot. Just sitting still is part of that whole energy system. And I can amplify that sitting still for rest of the week, and it won't be over, but just gives you a sampling of what this beautiful second sort of prescription of Patanjali's yogas kind of has energy in it. Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. Beautiful prescription. Just remembering that, just sitting still. So one more from Samadhi, but I think I can't resist putting on the table. So The next one, of course, prescription. One of the prescriptions in the Samadhipada is the prescription number 33, which talks about 4 kinds of relationships, rules of engagement with all people in the world. And according to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: happy and unhappy, wicked and virtuous. Only 4 kinds, quaternity. And there are very specific rules of engagement of how to participate, how to interact, how to dialogue, how to relate to each of these 4 groups. Very fascinating. It's very wonderful in my life and in my work with my patients. That with happy people, you should be happy with them. You should be friendly, not happy with them. You should just be friendly with them. But not too friendly, because you don't know why they're happy. They may just have swindled their grandma or whatever little money she had. And so you don't want to get too friendly with them. But because giving them the benefit of doubt that maybe they are happy for a good reason, you kind of stay friendly with them, but not too friendly. And then there are unhappy lot. With the unhappy lot, you should be compassionate, but not too compassionate, because you don't want to medicate away their pain and misery, because they probably need to feel miserable for what they have done. Sometimes it is not under their control. Like if you get COVID, it's not under your control if you get infected, in spite of your best efforts. But what if you are a rapist and you are unhappy because you got caught and you're miserable? Yeah. So then you can be compassionate. Oh, this poor guy will now go to the gallows, or in some states will be life in prison. So you can feel a little sad. Maybe he had a difficult childhood, who knows what. But you can't be too compassionate, because they need to work that out. So you can stay compassionate without being codependent or enabling. I presume that's one way to amplify it. And then there are people who are wicked. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is very clear about that. Stay away from them. If you're married to them, leave them. If you're living across the street from them, change your street, change your country. The only people you can't divorce, of course, are your parents. So they'll put them on the management program, nice Christmas card and all, and that's about the size of it. So with people who are wicked, you must maintain sort of total disengagement, except for management. You have to manage these people. So because sometimes you have no choice, if they are your boss, till you find a new job, you got to manage them. So that group is put on the management plan. They are soulless people. They have soul murderers. The last group, of course, is the people who are virtuous. By virtuous, Patanjali implies people who are connected to the soul, people who are old souls, people who have done their inner work. How do you know that someone is that virtuous? Well, you don't know. You feel them in your bones. You go into hypometabolic state. You relax, your headache goes away. You feel uplifted. You feel joyful. Now, of course, psychopaths can do that to you sometimes, but other than that, most of the time, if your intuition is well attuned, you feel these people in your system. The Patanjali's amplifications by the subsequent scholars gives much more detail on these 4 types and the rules of engagement. But for our purposes, the simplest approach is stick with the virtuous ones. Well, as they say in the 12-step program, stick with the winners and lose the losers as fast as you can. All the other 3 groups, you have to be cautious. The wicked ones you totally have to avoid. So now, of course, there's a lot of resonance between this Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and Carl Jung, because Jung, in his volume 16 on the practice of psychotherapy, etc., he talks about this whole idea of participatio mystique with the other. All of you, of course, most of you are Jungians, will remember that chart, A, B, C, D, connections between people. And the connection we are talking about, how we feel these people in our system, is through that unconscious to unconscious connection. And of course, if you connect that dot with the modern neuroscience research, of course, we now know that the participatio mystique has to do with mirror neurons. It has to do with resonance circuits. It has to do with how we can feel the other in our system. We get a CAT scan, we get an MRI scan of the soul of the other in our own system through interoceptive receptors. I've talked about it in some of my books recently, but again, that's a subject for a sort of a deeper dive at some other point. But I just want to connect these dots, that these timeless pearls of wisdom, these prescriptions for the soul work, are now sort of borne out by not only analytical psychology, but by hardcore neuroscientific research. Anyway, I don't think we need to prove anything to anyone, because always remember, and I learned this from my brother, who again is a physicist, so that is my source, that Gödel's theorem, which is outshines Einstein and many others. He's a great physicist, and his central principle is absence of proof is not the absence of truth. Because for many things in human consciousness, if we tune into the wisdom of the depth, it is so advanced that will take several thousand years for hard science to catch up with even putting together the right paradigms to start getting a sort of a superficial glimpse of the wisdom of the depth. But it is accessible to each one of us. And I think one of the great beauties of Jung's analytical psychology is that it goes with a deeper knowing. Like in your own neighborhood, Krishnamurti famously said that not knowing is the path to deeper knowing. So I always value, and that is the central theme of Buddhist tradition, a beginner's mind, a guileless mind, can see much deeper than any scholar or any instrumentation or paradigm of science. So and this is a scientific principle. The Gödel's theorem is not esoteric, it is not metapsychological, it's pure hard mathematics. You should read it up for those who have not had introduction to it. It's a very small, cute little book, which will take you a year to unpack, but it's quite fun when you do. It's called Gödel's theorem. So that is about that. So now I will go very quickly with next 5 minutes or so, try to wrap it up. Otherwise, we will be here long into the night. Sadhana pada is the preparation for samadhi, for deeper dive into the higher states of consciousness. And in that, there are many, many pearls of wisdom, but I will just introduce you to the central one, which is the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga tradition. What traditionally, when we do yoga, it is those 8 limbs, and the 8 limbs are in a pyramid going up. Yama means don't do abstinence from certain things, 5 of them. Niyama, observances, things to do. So do's and don'ts, the 10 commandments of yoga are right there at the bottom of that pyramid. After that, you have asana, stillness of body. And when the body is still, then of course your consciousness is still. Remember the yoga chitta vritti nirodha, going back to that stillness. And when your asana, your posture, your body posture is still and comfortable, then of course you regulate your breath. Then that is pranayama, which is breath meditation, which stabilizes your breath body, your prana maya kosha, the energy sheath of consciousness. And when you do that, then the 5th level, and there you go, this like going into now the higher levels of consciousness and transcendence, is pratyahara. Pratyahara is the withdrawal of consciousness from the outer and preparation for a deep dive into the interior. So this is going into the mystery of the self through pratyahara, withdrawing, drawing in your consciousness into the self, which is where the Upanishads begin. The Vedas are about outer life and how to manage life and love and relationships and this and that. And then pratyahara in Aryankas of the yoga. Anyway, I don't reference too much to other things, but just for keeping it simple, pratyahara is withdrawing your consciousness, taking it in so that it can move up to a higher levels of consciousness. In that, I will then quote here, you all are familiar with it, the 9th image of the rosarium, in which those of you who are able to see this, of course, you can see there are plate number 9. There are 3 parts to it. Can you see it for most of you? Yes. There is a winged bird and the wingless bird at the bottom. Then the consciousness is suspended, is kind of in interiority mode. And then there is on the top, there is this returning angel from the heavens, which is your emergent self. So pratyahara has to do with letting go of things which will not fly, which are not spiritually relevant or purposeful in your life. So that's an important part of midlife transition. Pratyahara, letting go of it that has lived out its relevance in your emerging narrative of life. And when you do that, then your energies are freed up to claim your skies, to meet your returning angel, to meet your teleologic purpose, your dharmic calling in life. And that is the idea of pratyahara. And when you do that, then the energy can be deepened. Then you go into three highest states of contemplative practices: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Dharana is concentration, dhyana is contemplation, and samadhi is oneness with the Brahman consciousness. So those states of transcendence are the deepest states of interiority, which each one of us can access if we stay still and pay attention to this. So those are the words of wisdom of the second of the sutras, the sadhana pada. The third one, of course, is the vibhuti pada. Now vibhuti means ash, meaning when you take something and you burn it down, citrina, to just calcination, just burning it down to its very essence. So when you burn things down, what remains at the end? Like if you cremate someone, what remains at the end is just the ash. So what you burn down your ego, when you burn down all these Maya and karmic tangles, when you go to the very core of your essence of who you are, that is your vibhuti, which is the ash that these rishis and the sadhus and the holy men put in their body. That means this is real life. Everything is reduced to its very essence, the Shiva's essence. So that is vibhuti. But the more fascinating part of vibhuti pada is more of it's a total paradigm. And I'm unpacking that for some presentation this time, is the whole idea of the rules of engagement with your imagination. It gives you the whole anatomy of a mystical experience. So when you do imagination, what are the rules of engagement? What are the paradigms? What are the signposts we can use in mundus imaginalis? So that is a very fascinating subject, and is, of course, for some of you to take a deep dive in if it is a subject of some interest to you. Jung has used those paradigms time and again in his Red Book, which is what I am unpacking in some other work at this time. And then, of course, when all is said and done, the final pada, the fourth pillar of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is Kevalya pada. Kevalya means just as. Just like Vibhuti is the essence, Kevalya is what remains after everything falls off, is the Brahman awareness. When you ask the question, who am I? So you'll say, I'm Dana the scholar, or I'm a father, or I'm a husband, or I'm a friend, or I'm an American, or I'm a human. But if you keep going down that line, or going up rather, or going sideways, what remains when all those layers are peeled off is Tatsvam Asi, your being continuous with the energy of the ultimate, the divine, the Brahman, the essence, the unus mundus, which was in Jung's Mysterium Connectionis, the higher state of consciousness, moving from unio naturalis to uno mentalis to unio spiritualis, and uno corporalis, all those layers of engagement. But at the end, you merge with the Brahman awareness, the Brahman consciousness. That is unus mundus, being part of that one world union with the Brahman awareness, with the spirit. Now, of course, that is antithetical, of course, sometimes to being in this world, but one can be in this world from that posture. Your hands do the work, your soul is connected to the ultimate. So that kind of duality and unity is part of this final sort of pada of the Patanjali, the Kaivalya pada. I want to close with a little quote from Upanishads, which is the basis, the foundation of Vedas, and so forth. And this is one of my favorite Upanishad, the Isha Upanishad. So let me just quote two paragraphs, two very brief paragraphs from this. One is, this was Mahatma Gandhi's favorite Upanishad, the Isha Upanishad. And Gandhiji always said, there is enough in this world for everyone's need. There is not enough in this world for everyone's greed. And this is a derivative of the central quote of Isha Upanishad. And I will read that out for you, just 4 lines. All this is full. All this is full. All that is full. All this is full. All that is full. From fullness, fullness comes. From fullness, fullness comes. When fullness is taken from fullness, when abundance is taken from abundance, fullness still remains, because by definition it is full and always will be full. And that is the mystery of the soul. That's the mystery of the dynamics of abundance. That when you are in the spiritual realm, there's always fullness. There is no scarcity. There is no deprivation. And the call of Upanishads, the call of the wisdom of the East, is to stay in that place of fullness, to stay in the place of that transcendent abundance. When you are in that place, if you only have one piece of bread, and there are 4 of us, we can have 1/4 of it in fellowship, in communitas, in love, in celebration, in a Eucharistic sharing of the Spirit. We don't have to fight and kill the other 3 to hog a little piece of bread. Often in India, when we always have guest is God, and we have made food quietly for 2 or 3 people, and then, some friends show up. They always insist that everyone will share in whatever is there. And everyone is always satisfied somehow. Sometimes if you end up to someone's house in the West, often they say, well, just wait in the living room, watch the TV, we'll just finish up dinner and you can join us. Not everyone, but often that is the experience. But I know some people are extremely gracious and will invite you in. So be it as it may, that is my very brief synopsis of the timeless wisdom of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. I'm open to some dialogue and some give and take. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope that you'll join us for dinner.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really beautiful, really wonderful. Thought, we might start with Patrick's response to this. Is that okay with you, Patrick?
Well, what a beautiful talk. I loved it, and it brought back a memory of many years ago, actually now, when I heard you speak at the C.J. Jung Institute in Los Angeles. It was a lovely evening lecture, and I wanted to acknowledge that and say as well, for the benefit of other people who are listening, that I'm sure all of your books are great, but 2 of them are among my favorites, and that's Path to the Soul. I want to recommend it to other people reading. And also your book, Awaken the Slumbering Goddess, the Latent Code of the Hindu Goddess Archetypes. I've recommended these books many, many times in the Hindu traditions course I teach, and they've always been deeply helpful and appreciated by people who have read them. So I, in anticipation for this and great excitement, framed half a dozen or so questions that I thought I might ask, and we have a lot of other panelists, so I'm going to need to restrain myself. But I thought what I might do is see if I could collapse several of them into one larger question to which you could address any part of it that you wanted. And I'll kind of create a preface for it that would hold these different considerations. So I liked, for example, the way you spoke about each of us having a terrestrial self and a celestial self. And I want to think about some other polarities as well here. And one of them would be individuation, which of course you have talked about, but also awakening, which may or may not be exactly the same. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about, how they connect, maybe not being exactly the same, and anything you might want to say about that, I would think would be very helpful to all of us. And with regard, also the context that you created for us with the tradition is so important, because it seems to me that it's the entire tapestry of the tradition that contains an amazing genius, which is found in many ways, including the way the tradition reinterprets itself at larger levels, but also ultimately at the level of what you call the Tantra, where the individual has to figure out what she or he can understand and practice that makes a difference. So you situated the Yoga Sutra in relationship to many of the other texts, and most people would agree, you might differ, but most people would say that in the Yoga Sutra really is a renunciatory text. And the ultimate aim of it really is for more monastic type people, or people who are wanting extrication from samsaric existence. But one of the ways I think about yoga is that it has, part of the genius I was alluding to in the tradition as a whole, is it has a recombinant DNA. So yoga amplifies itself in other texts and in other phases of the tradition. So you beautifully unpack the second sutra about the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, which gives us access to our depths. But then in a text like the Bhagavad Gita, we find that there are definitions also that it is evenness of mind or equanimity, it's skill in action. And then when we move even to the tantric tradition, the emphasis on embodiment, to have living liberation in the body rather than, exiting from it. I think all of those things are quite interesting when we appreciate that the Yoga Sutra is seminal, yet when we relate it to other aspects of the tradition, and then, as you have done so beautifully, connect it to Jungian depth psychology, we have a very big frame in which to understand how we can, and I'll put this in a bit of a slogan, how we can both grow up or mature, which is what I think the individuation process is mostly, if not entirely about, but also wake up to something that, is utterly unconditioned. To borrow a phrase from another tradition, from Zen, the original face before your parents were born. And I think that is often maybe a missing link in depth psychology, because there's many valuable processes, that we undergo, but we may still elude the access to that, whether we call it the Purusha, the Atman, or whatever word we want to use for it. So I hope that's been articulate enough to just say the renunciatory tendency, polarity on the one hand, the embodiment or engagement, the living it out, in life, and how awakening and individuation are ultimately something we want to weave together, but maybe they're not entirely the same. So I'll stop there and see if there's some pieces of that you might like to address.
Well, wonderful reflections, Patrick. I honor them. I will just pick up one or two very small golden pearls of wisdom and nuggets in your eloquent and thoughtful reflections. One is awakening. Individuation and transcendence in these prima materia of Hindu meta-psychology is about remembering who we are, awakening to who we already are, about becoming conscious of who we are. I think because of samsaras in Hindu meta-psychology, because of past life karmas or this life's complexes, we forget, we lose the memory of who we are. In yoga tradition, of course, my good friend, Father Joe, he and I wrote this book on spiritual paradox of addiction, which is a fascinating way of looking at addictions. Each one of us, our 30 trillion cells of our human body, an average human being has 30 trillion cells. Each of those cells has a brain, has a consciousness has a memory of its archetypal origins. And when we awake to the wisdom of our, just forget the mind or soul, just the body. So when you still the body, you rekindle awareness of this quantum memory you have from all the way from our stone existence to all those Vedanta stages we talked about. It suddenly floods in. It actually, you have to slow it down, because if it could paralyze you if you are not initiated. That is what happens to drug addicts. They open up the portal in the Patanjali's fourth, in the Kaivalya Sutras, the Kaivalya Pada. One way is to access this transcendence is drugs, of course, and Indians use that, of course. Even now they do in many of our traditions. But that floods the consciousness which is not prepared to receive the gift. If I suddenly gifted you a jumbo jet, I mean, I'll make you bankrupt, isn't it? You will not know where to keep it. In India, they say if you want to take a revenge from someone, they gift them an elephant. There's a problem, because what do you do with it? How do you feed it? So the awareness, you have to be even humble about how aware you want to be of yourself. But that's a subject separate. But the key is that we need to just be aware of who we are, of our timeless origins, of each one of us, and our interconnectivity. I think if we can only become aware of that, there will be no racial wars, and there will be no rich and poor, because we will all feel that connectivity. And I think because we have forgotten that we are part of one matrix, we have forgotten our interconnectivity, we have forgotten that we are all of the same archetypal germplasm of that pleroma. And when you go into these higher meditative states of consciousness, you feel this oneness with the universe, and you can't be one with the universe without being one with the other souls around you. There is a continuum. You can feel other people in your consciousness. So that is a whole idea of awareness, which is so central in the whole of the Veda tradition, and particularly in the Patanjali tradition, how to connect. And of course, Vedanta brings it home. It brings it into embodiment. I think there were many pieces to what you said, but maybe that is the one that I can leave it at.
So I wonder, I would like it if you would comment on the idea of the kleshas and samskaras that are discussed in the Yoga Sutra,
Sure.
in relationship to the complexes and the unconscious.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very Jungian, compatible question. Kleshas are basically complexes, but they're complexes from this lifetime, and the samskaras are the complexes from our previous lives. They are so deeply embedded, so they become part of our samskara or nature. So, but the Vedanta literature considers them a past life memory, or let's at least call it an archetypal memory. So they are not of your making. But I think for a Jungian student, one would say, when you are caught in a certain archetypal energy beyond your complex. As a matter of fact, I had a patient. He was the only child raised by very devoted parents, immigrants from Northern Europe, and very loving, very, he was their star, their prince. What he could do no wrong. So deeply loved. Particularly his mother was very devoted to him. And then he became a physician and had huge problem with women. Saw them as gold diggers, could not trust them. And I was very surprised by this, because it was not compatible to his life story. He was a very loving, devoted parents, a very devoted mother, maybe a little too devoted, but nothing that would create such a negative feminine mother complex issues, but a very negative mother complex. And it unfolded over time that his mother complex was really sort of beyond the mother complex. He was experiencing the part of the mother archetype that he could have never experienced in his family of origin. Such devoting parent that he was clueless about the dark mother. And the only way he could experience the wholeness of the feminine matrix is through projecting the dark mother archetype, the Kali archetype, on his poor first wife, who was a wonderful woman. I had met her once at a meeting. And she got the projection of that Kali, the dark mother, and his subsequent girlfriends. And the one who he ultimately married, he thought she's a gold digger, she's out for his money. And of course, soon after that, he got sick, and she's the one who took care of him for the rest of his life. And it still does. So the good mother prevailed, of course, through experience, but the only way he could experience the dark mother. So that would be the samskara. Somewhere in him was this paranoia about the feminine, which did not come from this life or his mother or his first wife. It came from an archetypal, maybe what Hindus would call it past life experience, samskara, or Jungians would call it from the experience of the mother archetype beyond the good mother, personal good mother. Yeah.
That was really helpful. Thank you. So I want to let others have an opportunity. So thank you so much.
Ashok?
Yes, Connie, hi.
Hi. So I want to pick up a couple things that Patrick mentioned. This split between renunciation and householder life
Oh, yes.
that we have in the West, we have in the Judeo-Christian tradition, mostly in the Christian tradition. We actually don't have it in the Jewish tradition, but we have it in the Christian. And, in India, it seemed to me when I was there that it was clear who was a renunciate. And it wasn't, the householders were not trying to be monks. They were kind of moving through the ashramas, the stages of life, and maybe at some time they would renounce, and become sannyas. But people were not experiencing that split that we have in the West. And that kind of leads me to say, I've been practicing for about 50 years now in this Advaita Vedanta tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I've practiced the sutras from Patanjali as practices. And I've met several people who are living in what you're calling Brahman awareness. And it's not the initial, and they're householders. All of them are householders. And it's not the initial stages of awakening like the witness. And it's really expanded non-dual reality whenever they want it, whenever they can put their attention in non-dual reality whenever they choose to.
Mm-hmm.
And these people are living in the body, in the world, in the family, and that has been very important for me to see, because I think I was carrying that split when I started meditating. And that's been really important for me to see firsthand and intimately experience, with people.
Well, I think, thank you for reminding me of that very important question that Patrick has asked, the whole duality between renunciation and participation in the world, in the material world, in the outer world, even the inner world, and how to reconcile those opposites into unity. And I think that is the essence of the Upanishads. That is the essence of the Vedanta, the culmination of the Vedic tradition. That is the essence in the end, in the Patanjali's Kaivalyapada, in that the renunciation is not of the world. The renunciation is of the ego. The renunciation is of the outer calling, the outer craving of the outer life. So you renounce the bidding, the Faustian bargain of the entanglement with the bidding of the ego. So you renounce that, which is renouncing the Maya and the karma. And when you renounce that, when you detach from it, that is the wingless bird that you have to let go, then you reconnect with, you ligate with your celestial, your Atman, your core self. And then you return to the world from that place of renunciation of the ego and the complexes. But now you are connecting not from a place of ahamkara, not from a place of ego, not from a place of karma, not a place of pursuit of artha and kama, possessions and attachments, but from a place of connection from a place of the soul, from the angle, from the dynamic of the self, because then that is guided by the Brahman consciousness, that is guided by the archetypal awareness. And then your participation is robust, actually, much more robust, but it is soul energetic. It is not ego driven. So that is how you reconnect. We reconnect the world, but from a place of the soul. Now you are basically what Jung calls doing the service, because once you have individuated, you must reconnect with the world, but not again, they say, I'm doing service. When someone says, I'm doing this service, it is not service at all in Jungian definition. Jung has amplified this whole dynamic of service. The service is what the collective calls you to, recruits you to. And you often do it kicking and biting and protesting, but you kind of, well, I have to do this. It's calling of the soul. And then when you do it, then it has no ego in it. It's egoless service. It's service coming from your depth, and it comes as a response to recruitment by the forces of the collective, the way it wants to use it. In the Christian tradition, of course, that the best put it by, and I don't know the intricacies of it, but I always love that prayer, Lord's Prayer, let thy will be done, thy kingdom come, which is about not my will, but the will of Lord, or the will of the collective, the will of the universe, the will of Brahman awareness. What is its instruction for my work in this life, in this world, at this point in time, in this narrative? And that is renunciative participation, involvement in the world. And then you become like a lotus. Even though you are in muddy waters of life, you are not contaminated by it, because a lotus always grows in the muddiest of waters and yet remains pristine and pure. When you are in the muddy waters of life from a place of soul or lotus awareness, that is what I would presume Jung would call complexio oppositorium, that you are bringing the opposites into this soul unity.
Patrick mentioned growing up and waking up, which Ken Wilber has really explored in very complex ways. And really, if anybody is interested in following up the difference between growing up, which I think is individuation, and waking up, which I don't think Jung got to. I mean, that's my opinion. The more I look into it, he stopped at the archetypes. He didn't get to samadhi, the experience of the transcendent.
Well, I would love to add to that, because I've thought about that a good bit. Joseph Campbell says that Sigmund Freud was focused on the rise from sunrise to the zenith of life, the coming to your adulthood, and that Jung was focused on the descent from noon to sunset, the maturing of your life and that kind of thing. And I would say that the hero's journey is the journey, it's following individuation, but where individuation, in my opinion, when I read it and I look at it, it often feels like it loses its focus and its juice at midnight when you unify the opposites. But Campbell focuses on bringing you all the way to sunrise, all the way to the rebirth, all the way to the resurrection or the new day or whatever. So I think that so I would say personally, because I teach this a good bit, I personally think that Freud takes us to noon, Jung takes us to past sunset and into midnight. And then I think Campbell really focuses on that eternal journey, that underworld journey to bring us all the way back to a new sunrise. Now I think you see it all in all of them, of course, but that's my feeling with it.
That was such a marvelous, helpful synthesizing for me, for whom this area is strange and mysterious and so attractive in ways that I don't think I can find the language to articulate. And in addition, it's just great to see you again after a number of years when we hung out in Jung on the Hudson.
Yes.
I don't know if this should be called a practical question, but I'm very interested in where you are professionally today. Where is your passion? What are you working on? What are you developing? You've mentioned your brother, the physicist, and it sounds like there's things going on between the two of you and maybe the realm of physics and spirituality, mythology. But I'm just very interested, and I think others would be too, if you just spoke for a minute or two on where your passion is right now in your work.
Well, certainly I have my analytic practice and work, and it is all, I see it more as a service and also as prima materia for my own development and my ideas. I think we get the patients we need, and the patients get the therapists they need. When time is right, they come together for a purpose beyond psychotherapy for both of them, because I think both people get psychotherapy in ideal approach. But what I have, and this again happened synchronistically, organically, in spite of me, not because of me. My latest passion is, of course, Jung is the central passion, because that becomes my paradigm, my yantra for unpacking all this that I'm unpacking. Neuroscience, and mixing that all up with the wisdom of Indian spirituality and this matrix that I'm talking about. All those pieces are coming together. Of course, I'll need several hundred years to put some things together. So I'm trying to catch a little bit of it, the wave. And again, since there's so much to do, I'm excited. I'm collecting my beautiful library of ancient Indian scriptures and so forth, and so writing about them and connecting those dots and flowing with what I need to do rather than what I would like to do. In terms of, I get called to present something, and that becomes a way to take a deeper dive into that particular piece of it. Murray Stein and some of the group in Zurich invited me to present something on all this stuff, my neuroscience and Hindu wisdom and the Jungian approach to imagination. So now, that of course is very specifically in two places in the system that I mentioned. One is, of course, in the Vibhuti Pada of Patanjali's yoga system, and the second is in the Samkhya Yoga, the Sutras. So those two have a maximum bearing on the subject of imagination, not just active imagination, but the whole mundus imaginalis, as the term the Frenchmen put together, and how to engage that matrix using those prescriptions. And I think Jung used it time and again without sort of maybe being specific about his yantra. But I think the roots, he was well read. He had a collection of Upanishad and Vedas, and he referred to them extensively in his work, and they are scattered throughout the collected works and the Red Book and so forth. So I'm sort of putting all that together, basically having fun till the right time runs out.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, Dad. Thank you.
Ashok, I wanted to just tell you what an incredible, rich, and soulful presentation it was.
Thank you.
It was really incredible. Thank you for that. I'm a clinician, and so when you had talked about the magic carpet ride, I went, oh my God, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, I am taking every single one of my clients on the carpet. It was, what an incredible image for me. I was incredible. I'd never heard it talked about that way, but it was wonderful. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. I really love the Hindu tradition, and I'm deeply connected to Shirdi Sai Baba.
Mm-hmm.
And last year I was at his temple, and I thought it was mind-blowing what was going on there. I had never seen anything quite like it. And what I saw in India was all these incredible, brilliant, soulful, holy men. They were everywhere, and I wanted you to talk about the importance of having one of these as a guide, a mentor for each of us, as well as for our clients, and the importance of that in terms of the transcendent factor. Because I believe that Sai Baba had all this miraculous energy, and at a time like this, we all need miraculous energy. So I'll leave it with that.
Yeah. Well, I think Jung had some antipathy to holy men of India, and he explains his reason in I think volume 10 or 11, East and West and so forth. And I understand those concerns, but for an average Indian, their individuation, their transcendence, their memory of their archetypal celestial self, their instruction into the path of dharma and renunciation of all these karmic tangles comes through, of course, three things, which of course is central in all traditions, but Buddhism spells it out very clearly: Buddha, Sangha, and Dharma. So Buddha is about finding a God image of your choice. It could be Buddha, it could be Christ, it could be Shiva, it could be Vishnu. In India, we have millions of gods to choose from. We can create our own yantra, so we are more blessed in that way. We have a bigger cloth to cut our clothes from. So that's the Buddha of one's choice in your tantra. And then, of course, there is the Sangha, which is communitas, which is very important. We Jungians have our communitas. I mean, this is what we have. This is our Sangha. Young institutes, Jungian gatherings become the Sangha for us. The gurus and the holy men of India provide that Sangha in their ashram, in their temples, in their holy work, is their parish. And so that is the Sangha. But the dharmic guidance comes from your guru or your guide. In our case, in the West, of course, it'll be your analyst or whatever. But in the East, the gurus are they are the analysts. They are the ones you go to for guidance about your dharma, about your spiritual path, about the path to being reborn after you go through your dark night of the soul. And as Will says, Freud takes you to your first morning, the Jung takes you to the evening, and then Campbell takes you to your night and maybe rebirth. But how does that cycle work? And what are you to do when you're reborn? Or why are you even reborn? Of course, Jung's famous commentary about the Bardo Thodol, the whole process of dying and so forth, is an excellent treatise on that particular subject, that when you die, in Buddhist tradition, you have three choices. You have Chika Bardo, meaning you've done many lifetimes and you're retired all your karma and samskaras and kleshas, and you can just merge with the collective at the moment of death. That's Chika Bardo. You just check into the collective. You're done with all this junk. Or you need a little more time. You want to measure twice, cut once, whether you want to come back here or whether you want to join the transcendent camp, whether you want to come back into celestial mode or terrestrial mode. So those choices, that crossroad, you get 49 days to make your choice. So that's the Chonyit Bardo, of course, that the Buddhists call about, the 49 days of discernment of what side to. And in those 49 days, you work out your bodhisattvas, the good and the bad bodhisattvas, the good energies, the bad, the higher self and the dark, demonic, shadow selves. You can work all that out in those 49 days. And at any point, you can make a choice. You can join Chika Bardo. Yes, I'm done this. I'm out of here. Or you say, well, it's not quite done for me. I'm married 3 times, 4 times, maybe 5 times. I have someone who's married many times. So I'll try one more time. See, maybe this marriage would be better. Yeah. So that person then has to be reborn in a new life. And that is the Sitpa Bardo. Sitpa Bardo is about, first you choose your parents who will be just right for your karma to work out whatever you have to work out. So the parents don't choose the child who's born. The child chooses the parent in that approach that is ideal for him or her to work out the kleshas and the samskaras, residues of the past incarnations. So you choose the optimal parents. So if you get very terrible parents, you probably need them in this approach to work out whatever you have to work out. It's not a very happy thought for many of our patients, but actually that is how it works. And then, of course, you are a Sitpa. So now a guru can help you short circuit all this junk and help you take a sort of a shortcut to transcendence. Work out all of this in the precinct of the guru's transcendent presence. And I think that can be very well. Of course, the Jungian analysis essentially also does the same, that instead of doing the terrain, you do the map of it. That is what individuation analysis is. You work all this out in the analytic alchemic vessel of the relationship with the analyst. Or you can go, so you can work out why you keep having failures in your marriage with your patient, and they can try 3-4 more marriages, or and create more karmic burden and misery all around, or they can work it out in their analysis as to their anima problem or shadow problem or mother complex or whatever the heck is going on. So a guru can do the same thing in the alchemic vessel of the ashram. In that relationship, you connect through the guru with the transcendent, with the sacred, and work it out in this lifetime, here and now.
I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
Pretty extensive, and I don't know what word to put in there. Is that like there are layers and layers and layers of complexities that I don't think one lecture does it any justice, but you did wonderful, as expected, of course. The question I have is from the perspective of Sufism, is that the divine is both an eminent, a transcendent at one and at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
What matters is the degree of your awareness as to when you switch from one to the other, but that the two are always there. Now, I was wondering that in the Hindu tradition, is this, again, a parallel, or is it an evolutionary stage moving from one to the other? Whether it has to do with the concept of just emphasis on the being first and then moving on to the becoming, or that you can oscillate between one and the other. I don't know if this makes sense, because we are talking more by in two different traditions, but I'm trying to see if there are common grounds between the two.
Well, the Sufi tradition, of course, is almost a sort of ecumenical in some ways. It combines the best of many spiritual traditions. In one of the most popular traditions in India, of course, is Sufism. As a matter of fact, one of the study tours I took 2-3 years ago was to the World Sufi Festival in Jodhpur, and it was a beautiful experience. They had Sufi scholars and Sufi practitioners from all over the world. Of course, Jung famously, I'll come to your question, I'm going to zoom in on it, from being and becoming. The Jung discussed the Sufi tradition in the 18th Surah of Quran in the 1939 Eranos conference, just before the World War II broke out. And it's a beautiful rendering of the 18th Surah of Quran, where Moses and his servant Joshua have this fish, and they are going to a place where two rivers meet. Of course, you know more about it. And then they are going to find some mystery where the two rivers meet. Of course, when they get there, they go to the place where the two rivers meet, and they're going to sit down and rest and eat the fish, have their picnic. And Joshua says, well, the fish is gone. It escaped. It went back into the water. And now they are hungry and there's no fish. So the fish is lost. So of course, is the analogy Jung talks about, the lost fish, the lost spirit, the lost faith, the lost Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, the lost connection with the unconscious. It returns to the unconscious. So we are lost when we lose our fish. We forget what the fish is, who we are. We forget our celestial self. We forget who we are, and we become just ego-based. We become karmically ridden and burdened by kleshas and samskaras in my tradition. So what do you do then? So then you sit with the void. What Moses and Joshua do in this 18th beautiful Sufi Surah of Quran is that they wait, not knowing what to do next. And then, of course, a wandering prophet shows up, Al-Qadir. And of course, he is the lost fish. They found the fish, but he's incarnate in Allah or in the divine is manifest. They don't know it. It is, but that. So when we are living life not aware of who we are, then a self symbol appears. If we are ready for it, thankfully they were ready for it, and they ally with him. He becomes their guru, their guide, and they travel together for some time. Al-Qadir is not interested in, mentoring them. So, well, we get lost. I'm busy. But they said, no, please, we do want to follow you. He said, okay, the condition is, as you know, Zaman, is that you can't speak. Whatever I do, you have to hold your peace. You may know, but others may not know the story. And of course, there are three very, very bad events in their consciousness. First is they're taken across the river by a fisherman. Next morning, Al-Qadir murders the son he sinks the boat of this fisherman. That's his only livelihood. And then the next guest they are of this couple that kicks them in for a night. They kill the 16-year-old son. And in the third and similar event. So the third time, Moses has enough. Say, well, whatever our condition, you got to explain what you're doing. This does not make sense. And then, of course, Al-Qadir gives his explanation for the so-called bad behavior. The first one was that the neighboring king was going to come and appropriate the boats of all the fishermen and then kill the fishermen so they can't build more boats for the enemy. So by drowning his boat, by sinking it, he actually saved the life of the fisherman and his family. And in each of these three instances, there was a deeper purpose in the misery and in the trauma. So I think in terms of being and becoming, when we are being run in the ego, we have forgotten who we are. We have lost our fish. And Al-Qadir, the soul, the self, incarnates in every tradition in its own symbolic form, as a guru, as an analyst, as a friend, as a lover, whatever. That's the Al-Qadir manifests in our consciousness. And if we are ready to embrace it, then, of course, you are ready to become what you are meant to be. Not your ego self, not your ahamkara self, but your Atman self, your self-driven self. And that part of you is more aligned with the collective, with the unus mundus, with the service, with the purpose with which you were put on this planet, in this life, at this point in the first place. So that would be a way to connect the dots between being and becoming who you are meant to be, in awareness, in memory of who you were, what your purpose was in the first place.
First of all, I just want to tell you how grateful I am for your presentation. It really means a lot to me, and so I'm very, very appreciative. In this kind of Western metaphysical tradition, Aristotle points out in his Nicomachean Ethics that theorizing is the highest kind of knowledge, but ultimately it's useless. Mm-hmm. And what I've enjoyed about your presentation and learned a lot is how you've made it clear the distinction between the kind of knowledges that are necessary, that appeal to scholars and mystics, et cetera, and those around everyday people in everyday situations. Mm-hmm. So my question then is around a practical question, and it is, how do we take the knowledges that you've shared with us today, particularly around the one begins with the self, right? In terms of change, in an era, for example, around the pandemic, where you have women and feminists who are talking about how this pandemic affects them in an uneven way, right? In terms of salary, in terms of domestic violence, et cetera, And then you have this Black Lives Matter movement, right, which I think we're all aware of. So how do you take this knowledge that we have, that I certainly buy into, and yet make it relevant to folks who are dealing with larger social issues?
Well, as a mere Jungian analyst and psychotherapist is out of my league to reflect on bigger questions, but I will attempt at least a personal response to a very profound question that is so relevant for our collective. And here is what I think from where I stand in my little, hillside, looking at the situation with some detachment, that what we are experiencing at this time, in the spirit of our time here, is the dance of Shiva, the dance of destruction, perhaps even a necessary destruction. And perhaps our leadership is a shadow shaman, is the shadow alchemist of the dark side that is presiding over this process, perhaps a necessary process. And I think the way we know our collective to be, not just in the West, not just in America, but in the whole collective, the world, because these are global problems. We have huge problems with minorities and women and so forth, and different classes in India, as spiritual as it is at some level. And of course, we have huge problems here. We talk about them more here, of course, which is a plus. But be it as it may, I see this as an alchemic situation, and we are in this closed vessel. There's no escape. The heat is turned on. All the necessary alchemic ingredients are in this alchemic vessel of collective transformation. COVID is COVID, and the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too, and all those are the necessary ingredients of this alchemic soup, the prima materia. And we will have to endure this destruction. I don't think there's any way out. We are at the brink, and I think I'm being hopeful. And of course, we'll probably find a vaccine or two, and short circuit is only till the next COVID or the next climate crisis or the next social crisis comes along. But beyond that, there will have to be a fundamental reformulation of our guiding principles of the 7.5 billion few earthlings. I mean, we are not a big group in the cosmic context, that's an anthill. And I think maybe the anthill has to be destroyed and rebuilt. And that sort of shatters our egocentricity and our, narcissism. Oh, well, humanity will end. But, there have been many, someone soulful was telling me just earlier today in one of the sessions, this is the fifth, the dinosaurs were the fifth extinction, not the first. So it has happened before. Shiva has done his dance of destruction before, and we will be consumed in this fire of Shiva, only to be in a fiery initiation of our new beginnings as a soulful and spiritual collective. Not because we are good people, but because we have no choice. If you're going to survive, the only way we can survive is survive together or not survive at all. So that is a choice the collective will have to make.
Thank you very much.
Ashok, beautiful, beautiful talk. And as I was sitting here listening to you respond and to talking with people, I had alchemy all the way through this. And I heard you talking about it earlier without formally talking about it as alchemy. And in India and in Patanjali or in these various Hindu traditions, do they study alchemy as we have come to know it in the West? Or is it just embedded in a deconstructive language of the way Hindus process their consciousness?
Well, I think it's not formally called alchemy. I think the closest you can get to alchemy is in two pieces in this matrix that I outlined, the mega map of the Indian system. One is in a very small place, the Upaveda, which is the Ayurvedic tradition, which is essentially an alchemic tradition. Is a dance between elements. It is dance between the three dosha systems, three states of consciousness, the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha, and so forth. So I think all that How to bring the balance between those two is about this homeostasis, bringing about this kind of balance in a vata state and so forth. All that is very close to the alchemic tradition. The other place where we talk about alchemy is in the Yajurveda, because that talks about the rituals and so forth for the personal and spiritual transformation. And the language is very alchemic. How to light the fire, how to contain the vessel of transcendence, how to create those structures. So even though the word alchemy is not used, the whole meta-psychology of alchemy is embedded in an implied and symbolic manner in that second Vedas. Yeah. Of course, Upanishads are the alchemy par excellence, because it is about transformation from ego to a soul-based and Brahman-focused approach to life and consciousness.
Well, I want to thank you for just an engaging and difficult myth salon, because there are a few among us who are deeply prepared for this through their scholarship or training or preparation, and you made this material really sing. You're an engaging speaker. You just really know your material, and I feel very privileged. I'm sure that everybody in the panel and in the gallery feels that. I do wish that we, had another hour to go and we could open it up to the gallery, but this is one of those times when we really don't have the availability to do that. And I really want to thank you for, coming to us today, and for just making a really difficult situation in our country with the pandemic, with the fires out here, with the floods, and then we don't have a representative from the floods, and the hurricanes. I'm still waiting for the frogs, but as we open this in silence, I'd like to bring it to a conclusion with a moment of silence, and really, again, just thank you deeply for this. So here we are. I was struck by one of the phrases that you just happened to use, that the Mary Oliver poem closed with, "Let it go, just let it go." So thank you. Thank you
all.
Ashok.